Law school. It's an investment in your future. But like all investments, without the right advice, it can lead to disaster. That's where PreLawPro comes in. Whether you're exploring the law, navigating the admissions process, or need personalized career guidance, at PreLawPro, we've got your back. Don't gamble on your future. Invest in it. Get started today at PreLawPro.com.
Welcome to another episode of the Professionist podcast. In today's episode, we're going to explore an interesting, important, and seemingly very glamorous role. When we think of international diplomacy, we have some pictures, some images in mind. We think of tuxedos and monocles and cocktail dresses, and even espionage. But the truth is that while it is a very interesting and a challenging and an international career, it's often more different and more varied than we often think. Today's guest graduated from Georgetown and then went on to complete her master's degree in Latin American Studies at the University of Chicago. She then went on to serve in the US State Department as a consular officer, having spent time all over the world and being fluent in Portuguese, Mandarin, Spanish, and even a little Russian. She lived through an earthquake, and prior to her recent retirement, she served as a diplomat in residence for the state of Texas. She's got some epic stories to tell, and it is a pleasure to have her on the show. She is Julie Kavanagh. Julie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm really honored that you gave me a call and set this up.
Absolutely. Diplomacy sounds very cool, and it sounds very interesting, and I think of cocktail dresses and tuxedos and, highfalutin balls where high-level contacts are interacting with each other. And I'm sure that's a part of it. But what drew you to diplomacy in the first place?
What drew me to diplomacy really at the time was a desire to see the world. I was young. I was 24 years old on my first day as a diplomat. And I wanted to see the world. And that was really what was driving me. I was curious. I had spent some time abroad as a student, loved that experience, loved learning languages. And so that's really what drew me to diplomacy. But I would tell you now, after having had a career of almost 30 years, that really what kept me in the career of diplomacy was that I really felt like I was doing something different and that I was making a difference in the world. And it was public service in a really positive and gratifying way. And that's really what I stayed in for, were the rewards of that public service.
Yeah, I guess you're the mouthpiece and the face of the United States abroad.
We are representing the United States abroad. We are promoting U.S. interests overseas. We're also helping U.S. citizens on a daily basis in a very, very individual way. A lot of people are drawn to diplomacy or a career in diplomacy because they're interested in foreign policy. And that is, of course, a huge part of what we do, and it's why we exist. But there are so many other components of a career in diplomacy that people just don't know unless they get to know a diplomat or they do some research or they're working in the foreign policy community, because it's huge. We are participants in a big foreign policy machine, and it's fascinating.
And you're in almost 200 countries, right?
Oh, I think I don't know. I lost track of the count. It's 220 maybe.
It's a lot, whatever it is.
Yes, there are a lot. And in many of those countries, we have more than one diplomatic post. We have an embassy and we have consulates. And in some places, we have consular agencies. I know when I was in China at the time, we had, I've lost count now, 6 diplomatic posts.
Wow.
I'm going to embarrass myself now unless I count it out, but about 6. Let's leave it at that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with an organization that size too, I think when I first started looking at this a few years ago, you underestimate just how broad the career paths are, because if you're running an organization that big and that geographically diverse, you've got to have not only diplomats, but you've got to have people who organize payroll and coordinate flights and all of the logistics. It must be an absolutely mammoth project.
That's exactly right. I mean, if you think about it, we are all over the world in these 220 places, and we have to get there. Our families have to get there. Our stuff has to get there. Someone has to figure out the schooling for our children. Um, and think about the computer needs, the technical needs in order for us to communicate back with Washington in a secure manner. That takes quite a bit of operational skill and knowledge and expertise, and keeping us safe, keeping our buildings safe, keeping the information safe. It is a very sophisticated undertaking.
And we've used the term diplomats a couple of times already. When we're talking about diplomats, are we specifically referring to foreign service officers? Is that really what we're talking about?
Well, I would actually be much broader than that. I think that any U.S. government employee who works in an embassy or a consulate abroad is a diplomat and has diplomatic status of one sort or another. They may be an attaché, they may be what we call a first or a second secretary, but they're all diplomats. They are all doing the diplomatic work of the United States. And it's really quite amazing. I don't think people realize how many agencies have a presence overseas. Now, the State Department is the lead foreign affairs agency, but we also have other foreign affairs agencies. There's the Department of Commerce, the Foreign Commercial Service. You have the Department of Agriculture has attachés overseas promoting U.S. agricultural and trade interests. So it's quite broad. I myself am a retired Foreign Service officer, so an employee of the Department of State. I took the Foreign Service officer test, passed through the entrance exams, and became a Foreign Service officer generalist. In the State Department, we have both generalists and specialists. So generalists are exactly that, jack of all trades, master of none, you could say. And we have specialists that range from physicians to security engineering officers. There are engineers, IT specialists. There's a whole range of careers that are available. But I would classify all as diplomats in that we are conducting the diplomatic business of the United States abroad.
That's a really good way of thinking of it. You were a consular officer. So could you help us understand what a consular officer is and what it is that they do?
Sure, absolutely. A consular officer really is someone who is dealing with the movement of people. That's how I like to think about it. So on the one hand, the primary responsibility of a consular officer is to protect and assist U.S. citizens abroad from assisting someone who may have lost a passport to someone who may be a victim of crime or who gets arrested or who passes away overseas. That is the primary responsibility of a consular officer, is to provide that service. The second aspect of the job really is to provide visa services to individuals from overseas who would like to travel to the United States. And that is a combination of border security, it is trade facilitation, it is educational promotion. It's really it's ensuring the free flow of legitimate travel while still protecting the borders of the United States and the security of the United States. So those are I would say basically the two primary components of consular work.
And it sounds like one of those jobs where no day is the same.
Absolutely. There is no predicting. Now, early in your career, when you first join the State Department as a generalist, regardless of whether you're a consular officer or any other type of officer, you are likely to spend a couple of years as a visa officer adjudicating applications for visa. So essentially deciding who qualifies for a visa under U.S. law. In those 2 years, your days are going to look generally similar. It's going to be pretty much the same every day. You're going to be interviewing visa applicants and deciding if they qualify for visas. And that's pretty predictable. Once you go beyond that, though, it is very unpredictable what your day may look like. And it will vary significantly depending on whether you're doing political work or economic work or managerial, administration, or consular, and so forth.
I'm guessing too, it's a pretty high stress position once you do get beyond that 2-year period when you start getting out into a country where you might be posted and helping Americans who might be in trouble. I imagine it's pretty stressful.
I think that's a very good point. Yes. I would say a career in the Foreign Service is definitely not for the faint-hearted, and it certainly is not for the lazy. It's a combination of stressful work and very hard work. I worked very, very hard in my career. We work long hours. It's unpredictable. You encounter a lot of stresses just through the nature of the job. I mean, if you imagine moving your entire household every 2 to 3 years, very often learning a new language along the way as you go on to your next posting, that in and of itself is stress that's built right in. And then when you add to it the various things that one experiences in a Foreign Service career, it can be quite stressful. And, it's being in the Foreign Service or being a diplomat is, I would say, a wonderful, wonderful career. And I would do it again in a heartbeat, but it is not for everybody. It really is not for everyone. And so I would say people who may be interested in it need to go into it open-eyed about the stresses and the challenges of it.
Did you have a full sense of what you were getting into? Because as I understand it, you pretty much went from, you were at Georgetown, you got your undergraduate degree, and then you went to Chicago and you got your master's in Latin American studies. Did you have a good understanding, or was it one of these things that you just knew it seemed really appealing, and when you got into it, you realized how much you loved it?
I did not have a clue. I had no idea what I was getting into. And, not to date myself, but we didn't have the internet. I had no real way to learn much about it other than through professors at Georgetown or at the University of Chicago. So I had no idea what I was getting into. And when I joined, I really just felt like, okay, I'm going to join and see what's what. And if I like it, I'll stay. If not, I'll figure out what I want to do when I grow up. And 30 years later, I'm still trying to figure out what I'm going to do when I grow up. So,
Was the master's degree a big piece of being a successful candidate?
It's going to vary for each individual. And I would say my guess, and this is just purely anecdotal, but my guess is that probably 3/4 of the Foreign Service has an advanced degree of some sort or another. Now, whether that's required or not, or whether it's simply that we are attracting individuals who have made that academic achievement, it's hard to say. It's very hard to untangle that web. For me personally, I had already taken and passed the Foreign Service exam when I graduated from undergrad. And I got my master's degree while my security clearance was being undertaken. And so I would say from that perspective, it was not essential for me to have that master's in order to pass into the Foreign Service. That said, getting the advanced degree gave me additional knowledge. It helped me build my skills, which of course only could help me be a stronger Foreign Service officer. So it was definitely worthwhile and valuable. And I don't regret having gone to get that master's degree.
You mentioned the clearance. I mean, I think people forget just how long those processes can take.
Yes, it can be quite lengthy, and it is very thorough, and it is renewed every 5 years. And we have to keep track of every place we've lived and every country we've traveled to, every country we've visited, and the people who do the background examinations, talk to friends, talk to neighbors, talk to colleagues and schoolmates, etc. It's thorough. Yeah. I mean, and there's a reason for it. To be in the Foreign Service, you have to undergo both a security clearance as well as a suitability review, which is a separate process. And it's really to make sure that when we are overseas representing the United States, that we, first of all, are trustworthy to maintain the security of the information that is available and that is out there or that we are developing. And the second thing is to make sure that we are conducting ourselves in a manner that is suitable to someone who is representing the United States. The fact of the matter is, once you're overseas as a diplomat, you are representing the United States, regardless of what time of day it is or where you are. Now, obviously, you can make friends and you can relax and you can have a good time, but you do need to bear in mind that you are representing the United States in an official manner, regardless of where you go and what time of day it is.
And I think that's something to remember is it's called a service. You know, you're making some sacrifices in order to represent the United States. In fact, a lot of sacrifices.
I don't want to sound like a martyr because it's a great career. I mean, there are so many opportunities and it's so fun and it's so interesting. And you have this opportunity to see the world and to have an influence on how things progress in the world. But yes, it's called the Foreign Service for a reason, because there certainly is a huge component of public service and sacrifice that is involved.
Well, I mean, even just in the lifestyle, because you have to move every couple of years, and that can be exciting at one phase or chapter of your life, but that can be hard later in your life, especially with a family, because you travel with your family, and uprooting every 2 or 3 years, that must have its cost as well as its excitement.
You would think that it would get easier as you move, but I don't know if it really does get easier. You get used to it, but it's still hard. But I have to tell you, we are so organized in our family when we move. We have labels, we have color codes, we know exactly where things are going to go. And if you are a pack rat, it's a great way to just induce you to get rid of things, because really, do you really need another stapler to drag across the world with you? Come on. So, I make light of it, and it is challenging, but it's actually also really fun to move into a new place every couple of years. It's so refreshing. And if for your kids, for some, they thrive in that environment. They can reinvent themselves every couple of years. If they don't like this identity, they're going to, try something new, and it makes it exciting for them.
Do they do a lot to help you kind of transition into that new culture in terms of finding schools and getting housing close to an embassy or consulate, or are you on your own?
There is an entire support network for us. There are sponsors who will help ease your way into the social world, and they will help you with your shopping at the beginning and show you where to go in the neighborhood. There is, most embassies, there's what's called a community liaison officer, whose job is to really focus on the community and the health and well-being of the community. And they help with schooling, letting you know what schools are out there. It's the parents who ultimately make the decision about the schooling, obviously, but there's a huge amount of support that we receive as we move from place to place.
What about for spouses who maybe aren't in the State Department? Because I imagine there are quite a few couples where they met while they were both working for the Department of State, and then they got married, and do they try and keep them together? And what happens if you have a spouse that's not in the service?
Spousal issues are a big challenge in the State Department. So I would say let's look at two groups. One group are those where both couples are members of the Foreign Service. For example, my husband and I are both now retired, but are Foreign Service officers. We're what's called a tandem couple. A tandem couple is where both members of the couple are in the Foreign Service. And we managed to stay together and be posted together throughout our career. I would say that is less likely to be true of someone coming into the State Department at this point, because the number of tandem couples is just larger, and so it's just a lot more complicated. But there is every effort made to keep couples together. Generally speaking, what happens is every couple of years when you're looking for your next assignment, it's a competitive process, and you have to identify which of the two of you is going to take the lead in terms of getting an assignment. And very often someone will take a position that is not in their area of specialty because it will allow them to keep their family together. Or they may take a position that is a lower rank than what is their personal rank. The other group is, to me, much more challenging, and that is those couples where one member of the couple is in the Foreign Service and the other is not. and it's that other member of the couple is what I call trailing talent. And so it's quite challenging. In some instances, there are jobs available within the embassy where they can go in and they can work there. Some people may be able to work on the local market depending on their profession and depending on the country where you're posted. In some countries, it's possible. In others, it's absolutely not possible. And that will depend on the status of the diplomatic relationship. It's challenging because I would say many of the jobs that a trailing spouse might be able to take within an embassy is not necessarily going to be a professional level job or a job in their profession, in their chosen profession. And so people have to make determinations as to what is important to them, what their priorities are, what they're willing to compromise on, where they can be flexible or not flexible. With the world now even more so used to remote work, I think that will open up a great number of opportunities for people and hopefully may make it a little bit easier for the trailing talent to maintain their own career while accompanying their spouse around the world. But it's tricky. It's very, very tricky. There's no question.
When it comes to assignments, is it one of those things where the younger officers that maybe don't have older children or school-age children or maybe aren't married, do they generally try and send them to the more high-risk locations? Or does everyone get sent to these places at different points in their careers? Because I think the idyllic picture of being a diplomat in Switzerland is what we have in mind. But as we said at the beginning, there's a presence from the State Department in, almost, if not 200, very close. How does that distribution of assignments work?
Well, first, I would say that one man's Switzerland is another woman's, I don't know, some other country. I personally like a little bit of chaos. I like the challenging traffic conditions and the hardship conditions. It's super interesting. So I would say it's not everyone's ideal necessarily to be that diplomat in Switzerland, although not to knock Switzerland, it's a great place. But the way it works is basically there is an expectation when you come into your career that you will spend your fair share of your career in difficult circumstances. And it's generally not considered cool to only want to go to London, Paris, Switzerland, and Rome and Tokyo. You are expected to share in the burden of the more difficult places. We used to have a formal rule called fair share where you had to serve a minimum amount of time, a certain amount of time, but they abolished that formal rule because the cultural rule is still there within the institution. And there was a determination made that rule was a little too rigid and made it difficult for people who had very, very legitimate reasons for not meeting the requirement, whether it be a difficult medical situation in the family or what have you. But there's no formal rule anymore as far as I'm aware, but everyone is expected to shoulder that burden. And the beauty is you do have some agency over your own career. You have some choice in where you go and when. So you can determine for this next assignment, I'm going to put myself forward for this particular position in this particular location. It's a tough hardship. It's an unaccompanied post. I can't take my family there, but this is a good time to do it because my kids are all in college and they're not going to be home anyway. And it's the time to do it. So you have some control over where you go and when you do so.
You mentioned, for example, some folks who might have a medical issue within their family with a child or a spouse. But what about applicants? So I imagine, for example, let's take diabetes where you need to take insulin. I'm imagining that's very hard to get some of that medication in different parts of the world. Does having a reliance on a prescribed medication preclude you from entering the Foreign Service?
It's going to depend on each individual circumstance. You do have to pass a medical examination in order to enter the Foreign Service, and be deemed suitable and healthy enough to serve anywhere in the world. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be in perfect health. The medical establishment in the State Department, there's a whole bureau of physicians and nurse practitioners. They're going to do an evaluation. They're going to do an analysis. It will very much depend on if it's a chronic condition, is it something that one can prepare for in order to avoid an acute situation? If so, then you may very well receive a medical clearance and be eligible to join the Foreign Service. If not, if it is something that is considered completely unpredictable and really difficult to predict and to prepare for an acute situation, then they may determine that you don't qualify because you would not be eligible to travel to work all around the world. I can't speak to diabetes or any other specific condition because it's going to very much depend on your individual medical and health situation. I would say that someone who has a chronic medical condition should not select themselves out. If you're interested in the Foreign Service, go through the process. Our testing is free. Yes, that's right. It's free unless you don't show up, in which case we charge you for the slot. But it's a free process until you get selected for an interview somewhere, in which case you have to pay your way to go to that interview. But otherwise, there's very little downside to applying. If you're interested, apply, go through the process. If you make it through, see if you're medically eligible. I really don't believe in self-selection out based on some kind of cloudy, murky, what if hypothetical.
Is there any way that someone can get some kind of clarity before they go through the work of preparing for the test, or they need to really go through that whole process first and then find out?
Are you referring to clarity on the medical?
The medical side of things, yeah.
Unfortunately, no, because it's a resource issue is my guess. I would say, the State Department isn't going to evaluate you medically and see if you're fit if there's no way you're going to pass the test. That's not a good stewardship of taxpayer money.
Well, I mean, this is probably a good place to jump off and talk about the civil side too, because there is a lot of people who work for the State Department here in the United States.
Absolutely. There are more civil service employees in the Department of State than there are Foreign Service. I mean, a huge number more. I forget what the numbers are, but it's much bigger than the Foreign Service.
And how does the role differ apart from the obvious location differences?
So a civil servant is someone in the State Department. A civil service employee will work in one place for the duration of their career unless and until they apply to a different job. So in the Foreign Service, when you join the Foreign Service, you join the program. It's like joining the military, and you join and you get sent all over the world. You have to say, yes, I'm willing to go wherever you in your infinite wisdom choose to send me. Although, like I said, you do have some career.
Do you have to sign a contract for a certain period?
I can't remember if there's an actual contract, but there is a requirement that if you leave too soon, you have to repay the cost of training and travel. I don't recall what those exact details are, but there is a commitment that you have to make. For civil service, you apply to a specific position in a specific location. So you might apply to become a passport specialist in Houston, Texas. You may apply to be a trade analyst in Washington, D.C., or an environmental specialist in Washington, D.C., in a different bureau, and say in the Bureau of Oceans, Environment, and Science. You apply to that individual specific position. And if you're hired, you go into that position, and that's where you stay. And then if you choose to compete for another position in another office or at a higher grade, then you do so. And if you get selected, then you move into that office at whatever that location is. And in the civil service, that's how promotion works, is the way you get promoted is you compete for the next level up position. Sometimes it may be in your own office. Sometimes it may be in a different office. In the Foreign Service, we are reviewed on an annual basis for promotion, and our promotion attaches to our rank, or our level attaches to the person as opposed to the job or the position. similar to the military where you have generals and lieutenants, et cetera. In the Foreign Service, we have personal rank.
What does that career trajectory look like from someone who's first entered? Like you talked about ranks and titles. Like what does a general trajectory look like?
In the civil service, you can come into the civil service at a GS level. That's a general scale level in the civil service. And it applies for State Department as well as other agencies. And you could come in anywhere at any level, sort of depends on what your background is. And so a typical entry level position in the civil service for someone who has say a master's degree, maybe a GS-9 or a GS-10 maybe, and the numbers go up. And so you would go 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and then there is the senior executive service. So that would be your possible career progression, and it will depend much on you and your qualifications and the positions that may be available. In the Foreign Service, we have somewhat reverse ordering. The higher the number, the lower you are. So typically you'll come in at a 6, 5, or 4, depending on what your background is. And then you can go all the way up to a 1, which is what we consider to be sort of the normal career trajectory. Then if you choose to, you can compete to enter into the senior Foreign Service, in which case you first become a counselor and then you might become a minister counselor. And then it goes, there's career minister and career ambassador. So it goes up the scale that way. And that would be your normal progression. A typical Foreign Service career is going to be from, say, Foreign Service 5 up to a 1 or possibly an OC, which is counselor.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you entered the Foreign Service at 24.
Correct.
What if someone is 34 or 44? Are they too late to the game, or is there a real willingness to recruit people who will have shorter careers in the service?
I think I was more of an anomaly than the norm. That was true then, and it's true today. I think the average age of someone coming into the Foreign Service as a generalist, I believe, is, in the early to mid 30s. And for specialists, it's later than that. It's maybe upwards toward 40.
I guess there's all that training they need to get done before they're
right.
eligible.
For the specialists, we're looking for people who have a lot of experience, or an engineer who has been working for at least 5 years, a physician who has 5 years of clinical experience minimum. So that bumps up that age. But to join the Foreign Service, you can join all the way up through age 59, I believe is still the case.
Is there a mandatory retirement age?
There is a mandatory retirement at 65.
Okay.
So if you join at 59, you're obviously going to have a shorter career in the Foreign Service than someone who comes in at 24 or 34 or 44. But we'll take you. If you pass the process, we'll take you. And there are some options that are open to people who are older than 59. Consular Fellows is one, which is a contract appointment. They do consular work at the entry level, and there's no age limit on that particular one. And in fact, I had working for me when I was in China, someone who was on her first assignment as a consular fellow, and I don't know how old she was. She was in her 60s, somewhere in the 60s. She had had a full career as a Mandarin professor and decided to join the Foreign Service for a few years as a consular fellow, for the service, for the impact, for the adventure. And she was awesome. She was really a wonderful contributor to our team. So, there are definitely possibilities out there.
You mentioned qualifications being relevant to progression in the Foreign Service. One of the things that is obvious from your background is you have a lot of language skills. Did you pick those up beforehand, or did the State Department kind of help you acquire those skills as and when you were posted to a particular place? Because I imagine that process itself, just learning a language to a level of proficiency, despite what Rosetta Stone will tell us, takes a little while.
I spoke Spanish and Portuguese before I joined the Foreign Service. I'm not a native speaker of either one. I started Spanish in middle school, and Portuguese I started studying when I was in college and continued in grad school. In order to join the Foreign Service, you do not have to already speak a foreign language. If you're a specialist, there is no requirement that you ever have to speak a foreign language in order to stay in the career. Now, you may have to go to certain locations, in which case we'll train you if you don't have that language. To be a Foreign Service generalist, we don't require that you have the language before you join, but you must acquire proficiency in a language in order to remain in the service. So you come in a probationary period, if you will, and in order to get off of that probation and to get tenure, you have to have proficiency in a foreign language. Now, if you come in without one, the State Department will give you every opportunity to be assigned to a location where you're required to have it, and will give you the training. If you're like me and you came in with a language, the State Department may decide, oh, here's someone who seems to have a capacity to learn language as well. We may make use of you in the language that you already have. And at the same time, we might decide, oh, let's teach another language because let's make use of the capacity that this person has. So this is a great secret of the Foreign Service. It's not really a secret, but I got paid a salary to do nothing but study Mandarin full time. And I was given a skill that nobody can ever take away from me. The State Department paid me to learn Mandarin. They also paid me to study Russian. Now, notice I say learn Mandarin, study Russian. I was a less successful student in Russian. I tested well, but then promptly forgot everything I learned. I don't even want to say how old I was when I started learning Russian. And so that's my reason or my excuse for not having retained it.
Is there a central location that they send you to, or do you learn, like, for example, with Mandarin, did you learn that in China, or did you learn that stateside at a language school run by the State Department?
The State Department runs and owns a training facility that is in Northern Virginia. It's called the Foreign Service Institute, where we go for training of all sorts, including foreign language training. For several languages, there are additional field schools. So for Mandarin, there's a field school in Taipei. There are also some training opportunities on mainland China to go for additional Mandarin training. Arabic, there used to be one. I'm not sure if it's still operating. Japanese, we have a field school. So essentially, you do the beginning training in the DC area at the Foreign Service Institute, and then you may go on to the field school to do additional training.
One of the questions I have deals with the flexibility within this career. So there's consular officers, there's political and economic officers. Is it possible to go in as one and then maybe you're in there for 10 or 15 years and you realize, you know what, actually, I'm enjoying what I'm doing, but I need a change. Can you change paths, or is it something that you need to be pretty clear on before you enter the service?
There are 5 career tracks as a generalist: political, economic, consular, management, and public diplomacy. And you do have to choose before you join which of those is the career track that you'd like to pursue. Now, once you join, most of your career you'll probably spend in that particular career track, but we do have opportunities for you to do an assignment or more than one assignment that is not in that career track. It is more difficult to formally change from one track to another, though you can do so. There is a process, but it's a little more difficult, and it has to do with whether there's a deficit at your level in that particular track. It's very, very bureaucratic. But we all come in as generalists. If you're coming in as a generalist, you come in as a generalist, and we expect you to have the skills that it takes to be a generalist, meaning you sort of need to be able to do it all. You're going to specialize in one or the other as you go through the career, but the very, very best generalists are those who have skills that translate and who have the ability to at least understand and work well with the other offices and other tracks and be able to take advantage of the skills and things that they have to offer and really be a jack of all trades. Because the fact of the matter is, as you rise in the Foreign Service, you're going to be doing work of all sorts. So once you become either a section chief or certainly a deputy chief of mission, you're going to be managing people. You're going to be doing public diplomacy work. You need to understand how visas work. You'll be helping U.S. citizens. You need to understand the political environment, the economic environment, and you really need to have those skills across the board. Many people who have come to me who are outside the Foreign Service who want to join, who are students, are driven by their interests in foreign policy. And I would say that it needs to go beyond that. You need to have a skill set that goes beyond your knowledge of foreign policy. If you can't ruthlessly manage your email box, it doesn't matter if you're an expert on foreign policy, you're never going to get anything done. And if you can't get along with people, you're not going to be able to get the meeting for anybody to listen to your fantastic ideas about foreign policy. It really needs to be much, much broader than a simple a knowledge of foreign policy.
It's obvious that you enjoyed your time in the Department of State. And it's obvious just from listening to you for 5 minutes that you enjoyed that career. But when you think back, what did you find frustrating? Like, what were some of the things or the situations or the challenges that were frustrating?
I had a lot of them. And anyone who says otherwise about any career is lying, if you ask me. Being in the Foreign Service or working in the State Department or working as a diplomat means you are part of a bureaucracy. And it can be extremely frustrating. It can be excruciatingly frustrating. You have to learn which battles to pick. And you have to navigate or walk the fine line of accepting certain things and not accepting other things and being able to work in that bureaucracy. I think that is probably one of the biggest challenges that I faced personally. I think another big challenge that I faced, and I think that today's diplomats and those of the future are going to have to face even more, is that I think that we live in a world where there is zero tolerance for failure. With the scrutiny that we get through social media, the news, the way it works, there's very, very little tolerance for failure. And when you're working in a bureaucracy, it's already not innovative. So how do you promote innovation and risk-taking in that type of environment, in a bureaucracy that's operating in a world with zero tolerance for failure? It's a super, super challenging problem that we're going to continue to have to face. And I'm not saying that we want a bureaucracy filled with people who are going to just risk everything all the time, take no prisoners, no holds barred. But at the same time, you need to make progress. And progress means you try things. And I don't have the answer to that. I think it is a great challenge for us as an institution. I still say us as an institution, even though I have retired, because I am and always will be a Foreign Service officer. But I think that that's something that our people in the future are really going to need to grapple with even more than we have in the past.
That's a really good point to jump into this next question. It's something we ask everybody who comes on the podcast. And it is some version of, where do you see your profession going in the next 10 to 15 years? And so in the context of diplomacy, what major changes do you think that the average diplomat is going to see in the next 10 to 15 years?
I think that's a great question. I would say technology will continue to be a problem for the State Department and for government in general. The government is not creating the technologies. It's a user of technology. And so people who work in the private sector sometimes come into government and are surprised that we don't have the latest cutting edge technology. It's because we're purchasing it, we're not creating it. But I think that the profession is going to continue to grapple with how to adapt and use technologies because the world expects it of us. And we need to do better at adapting and adopting, or adopting and adapting, however you want to phrase that. And so I think that that's one thing that we're going to see as we go forward. I think there is going to be a much greater use of technology, and I think that's going to be a direct result of this pandemic of the past year. We do more meetings remotely. We do recruitment fairs and recruitment interviews remotely. I think that we're going to see more use of that. I would love to see, and my colleagues at the State Department won't like this when I say it, but I would like to see somehow moving in a more technological direction when it comes to visa operations. Maybe they have already, and I'm not aware of it because I haven't been in the field recently, but using more and more technology to help with risk analysis for visa applicants or other type technologies. But I'll go back again to say we live in a world with zero tolerance for failure. So how are we going to be able to do that? I don't know. I think it's super challenging.
Yeah, that's a really good take on it. What has retirement been like for you? Because you were in this demanding, high pressure, high stakes career for 30 years. It must have been, was it jarring, or were you really just ready to just take a breath?
I think I was really ready to take a breath, but I had somewhat of a transition. I left my assignment in China where I was very much part of a team, very intense team all the time. And I came back to the United States to an assignment as the diplomat in residence for Texas, where I was on my own. Of course, I belonged to an office. The office was in Washington, and I had phone calls, and I had Zoom calls or Skype or whatever. But I was on my own, essentially, here in Texas. And that transition was super hard for me. I was lonely. I felt disconnected. I felt isolated. It was super challenging. So I had that transition before I then came into retirement. I would say for most folks who are going right from the very intense team mission job into retirement, I think that it is a big shock and a challenge for them, particularly because we uproot ourselves all the time. And so it is more difficult to have an in-place social network. I didn't know anybody here in Texas when I moved here as diplomat in residence, except my brother, who has been here for a long time. But other than that, I did not have that social network. So it makes it challenging. That said, it's been great. The silver lining to the pandemic for me has been, it kind of forced me to just take a breather and focus on self-care, focus on family. I've done a little bit of volunteer work, but the opportunities have not been great. And that's okay for now. I'll be getting out and doing more things as things open up, I'm sure. But it's been a very nice breather. But I'll tell you, I have discovered that 30 years of stress and tension apparently are all stored in my tight hamstrings because I cannot get those suckers loose for anything.
I think one of the questions that begs to be asked on the back of that is, how did you separate yourself from that identity as Julie Kavanagh, diplomat? I think veterans struggle with it a little bit as well. I was a Marine or I was a soldier and now I'm not. What advice would you have for people who may be facing an unexpected job search or job loss or an unexpected retirement or even just retirement to change their sense of self-identity from what they were in terms of their job to this next chapter?
I would say I'm not an complete expert on that because I still do consider myself, a big part of my identity is as a former Foreign Service officer, for sure. But I think that some things that help are developing hobbies. I'm very glad that I started to learn to knit when I was in China with a group of friends, and I've been able to continue that. And I enjoy cooking. I always have. So I have continued with that. And I spend time doing that. I spend time doing things that I enjoy. And exercise, I think, is super important. And certainly as we get older, it becomes even more important. So I think that that's a really good activity for people to put some time and energy into. I've taken up a little bit of yoga, which has been great. I've started to learn somewhat how to relax those hamstrings. I won't say I'm there completely. And explore. There's so many things out there. And there's this great thing online you can find called Meetup, where once the pandemic's over, you can identify all kinds of different social groups in your area. There are knitters and walkers and partiers and readers and you name it. So it's out there. And I would say it's not nearly as scary or dreadful on the outside as I thought it might be.
Yeah.
I'm loving it, quite frankly.
Wonderful. I've got some questions from our followers on Instagram, and I'll just run through a few of those if you've got the time.
Absolutely.
Sandra, she writes, I'm planning on taking the Foreign Service. Sorry, I've just got it written down she's got it written down as FSOT, so the Foreign Service Officer Test. But I have a 6-year-old son and a spouse. If I'm able to make it, how hard is the transition to the Foreign Service and taking a young family abroad?
So I would rephrase that question from Sandra and say, I'm planning on taking the Foreign Service Officer Test, and I have a 6-year-old child and a spouse. Because the but implies that they're an obstacle, and they're not an obstacle.
It's a great way to think about it.
They're who you are. They're part of you. They're your family. I raised 2.5 kids successfully in the Foreign Service. I say half because one's still in high school, so we have to get her out of high school yet. But the transitions are difficult, but you make them. There is a support network. There is a whole structure. The important thing, though, is to determine what is important to you as a family. Your family has to be involved in your choices for your career and in your moves and in your transitions. There are strategies for making those transitions easier on your children. We did not operate a democracy in my household. We did not open up to our children to vote where we would go. But we did involve them in learning about the new place when we had been assigned, in getting excited about the new house, or, buying bed sets for their new rooms when they move. There are strategies that you can use to help your children through it. Your spouse has to be your partner. They have to be willing to be open-minded and to talk through things and to know that they're going to have challenges and to accept that they're going to have challenges because they know that they can work together with you through those challenges. I won't lie and tell you it's easy, but you know what? I was never married with children, not in the Foreign Service, but I'm guessing that's not easy either. So It's just it's a different kind of hard. Just look at it that way.
There you go, Sandra. I hope that's helpful. Chris from Orlando, he says, I'm a police officer and I badly want to get out, but I'd like to do something that I enjoy. Is there a role for somebody with my skill set in the Foreign Service or the State Department generally?
We have a Foreign Service specialist career called Diplomatic Security Agent. And that would be probably the first place that you would look that would make use of your skill set. But I would not rule out the possibility of becoming a Foreign Service generalist if that's what you choose to do. You say you want to get out of being a police officer. Think broadly. What are you interested in? What is your skill set? For Foreign Service generalists, you don't have to have a degree in international relations or anything like that. I had a boss who had a biology degree. I have known people, I had someone work with me who had a 20-year career in manufacturing with a business degree before he joined the Foreign Service as a Foreign Service generalist, also known as Foreign Service officer. Those are interchangeable. So yes, look at diplomatic security. That may be the route that you want to take, but also consider becoming a generalist.
David from Phoenix says, my spouse is a permanent resident, but I am a US citizen. Will this preclude me from joining the Foreign Service?
It will not preclude you from joining the Foreign Service. The State Department will look at your entire situation when evaluating you for a security clearance, and holding foreign nationality may affect the length of time it takes for that security clearance to go through. At the end of the day, in some instances, it might mean you can't get a security clearance, but that is only in some instances. The fact of the matter is we have so many people in the Foreign Service who they themselves or their spouses or both were not born as U.S. citizens. And you must have U.S. citizenship to join the Foreign Service, but your spouse does not. And it is very common for you to see people with spouses who are not U.S. citizens.
Fantastic. Savannah, she writes, I'm getting out of the military at the end of the year. Does my veteran status help in my recruitment process?
Congratulations on your impending transition out of the military. Thank you for your service. And yes, veterans preference does apply. It's relatively complicated depending on what job you're applying for, but yes, it does apply. I would refer you to our entire recruitment team who can help figure out how it applies. And in fact, if you check on our website on the State Department's website, it's careers.state.gov. There is likely a whole section devoted to explaining how veterans preference works.
And and just a quick note, that website is excellent. Like, there's a ton of stuff on there. So if you've heard what Julie's had to say, and this is something that's kind of piqued your interest, that's a great place for you to start to get some of that background information. Last question comes from Hamish. He says, I did not do well in college for a lot of reasons, mainly immaturity. I'm now 38 and have been working successfully, and I'm not the kid idiot that I was. Be kind to yourself, Hamish. Will my poor choices in college mean the Foreign Service is out of reach? I'm guessing that that's probably relating to some academic stuff as opposed to anything else.
Well, even if it is relating to something else, let's talk about that. No, you are not precluded from joining the Foreign Service based on poor choices in the past. Unless there are things like serious felonies, like you committed murder, then I think it's highly likely you won't be qualified to join the Foreign Service. I'm assuming you're not talking about that, Hamish. Even, people with a criminal history who may have a couple misdemeanors, you have to tell the truth. You have to show remediation. You are not going to be precluded from joining the Foreign Service. It will be evaluated as part of that background examination. But in terms of the academics, first of all, to join the Foreign Service as a generalist, we do not even require that you have a degree. We require that you be able to pass through our testing. So there's a written examination called the Foreign Service Officer Test. It's a knowledge-based test. Then you go into, if you pass that, you go into the next phase, which is writing essays and answering questions about your background and your experience. And it's mostly going to be related to your professional experience and your job experience, or your work or your life experience and your intercultural skills and so on. It's not going to be a review of your transcript. They will look at your transcript as part of the entire process, but they'll be looking at you as an entire package, not just a transcript, not just a grade, whether you passed or failed microeconomics when you were a sophomore at your university. It's looking at you as a whole package. So go for it, is what I say.
Good stuff. There you go, Hamish. I hope for everyone who's listening, this has been a really helpful interview. I know it's always a pleasure to talk with you, Julie, and to hear about your experiences abroad. And thank you for taking the time to join us on The Professionist.
It's my pleasure to join you. I'm sorry I talk so much. You have a good job ahead of you to edit.
Makes my job easy when you talk. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks again for joining us on this episode of the Professionist podcast. If you'd like to find out more about our past or upcoming episodes or any of our guests, head on over to www.theprofessionists.com. That is theprofessionists.com. You can find us on Instagram at The Professionists, and we're also on LinkedIn. We'd love to have you like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. Make sure that you never miss a new episode. Stay up to date with developments in the podcast and also just great information as you progress through your own career on our blog, which is on the website. And stay in touch. Also, if you have the time, it's a huge help to the podcast if you can leave us a review. And we look forward to finding you all fit next week. Thanks.